everyone, and welcome to our panel, Workplace Suicide Prevention and Postvention, Employer and Professional Association Perspectives and Lessons Learned. I'll be the moderator today. I am Sally Spencer-Thomas, co-chair of the Workplace Suicide Prevention and Postvention Committee under the umbrella of the American Association of Suicidology, and I'm very thrilled to have our panelists here today. Jeff, I'll have everybody introduce themselves, but just to orient everybody, Jeff is here right next to me. Well, you know, socially distanced. And the other panelists are from different parts of the country. So this is truly hybrid action as we speak. So I just want to orient everyone a little bit to the work that American Association of Suicidology is doing in workplace suicide prevention. We are partners with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and United Suicide Survivors International as the three collaborative partners that have put together and are now disseminating the national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. We launched these on World Mental Health Day, October 10th, 2019. And they are about 8 guiding principles, as you see up here. I don't have time to go into all of them, but I just want to orient you. There's 8 guiding principles and there's 9 practices that we try to enroll our workplaces, professional associations, unions, et cetera. They're organized in upstream, midstream, and downstream categories. And we have a pledge program where organizations or leaders can take the pledge to make suicide prevention a health and safety priority. And then after they become registered pledge partners, they can earn badges. More on that at a session later today. I also want to acknowledge one of our panelists today, Dr. Mark Jones from Union Pacific. His company is sponsoring our evening outdoor reception tonight in celebration of the partnership and the guidelines. And also we're going to be announcing something very exciting that I'll give you a sneak peek at, which is that Anthem Foundation is underwriting and supporting a new certification program for the guidelines. So just wanted to kind of give you a little backstory of the panel. Several of the folks here have engaged with pieces of the guidelines, and also a couple serve on the committee. So I'm going to just kind of go round robin and let everyone introduce themselves. And we'll start with you, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Frost with Howard S. Wright, a Balfour Beatty company. I've been in construction. I'm working on my 14th year, and I've seen a lot, and I train a lot, and I also have had many conversations with people in the field. And since that CDC report came out that put us at the top of the list for high risk industries, I've kind of made it my passion to be that resource for mental health as well as physical health. And I'll detail more of that during the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And Lori, say hi.
Hi, I'm Lori Rubinstein, and I'm the executive director of the Behind the Scenes Foundation. So we are a charity that serves the entertainment technology community. And these are the people who work behind the curtain, behind the camera, and on the road to bring you every form of entertainment you can imagine, as well as corporate events like this conference, special events, and much, much more. They are really the unseen population in the world of entertainment.
Excellent. And Mark Jones.
Hi, I'm Mark Jones. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm the General Director of Health and Medical Services at Union Pacific Railroad. And we have partnered with Sally for almost a decade now on suicide prevention. I'm also an executive board member of the Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention.
And Jeff.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Thompson. I'm a NYPD detective, 18 years. I'm the department's first ever mental health and wellness coordinator. But I'm really talking mainly from my role of the polo shirt that I'm wearing in my background. I'm also a research scientist at Columbia University at the Department of Psychiatry. And what I do is with my Columbia hat, I try to inform best practices in evidence-based for practical application in law enforcement, not just in the NYPD, but other agencies as well. And I'm really fortunate to be doing what I'm doing and be a part of this great panel. Thanks, Sally.
You're very welcome. All right, so each of you has a story to tell, and I know most, but not all of your stories, and we really want to know why. When I work with employers, sometimes it takes a lot for them to take that first step beyond maybe just raising awareness to actually start doing some action items. Sometimes they're daunted by the prospect of doing suicide prevention. Sometimes they don't want to be, the first kid on the block with a suicide prevention program because people might wonder what's wrong with you. But each of your organizations took bold steps in this space. And so just interested in kind of what motivated that. And let's start with you, Jeff.
So I guess what got me involved and I like to remind my brothers and sisters in law enforcement, but everybody, yes, we're police, but we're also human beings. We don't wear that uniform 24/7. So looking and learning from the approach of what's been done elsewhere, because suicide's awful, especially when it happens to one of our heroes. And when people dedicate their lives to serving and protecting others, we've got to make sure that they're looking after themselves and each other. And we had a really bad run of suicides where 2 years ago we had 14 people in our agency alone. And speaking of police in general too, I don't like just throwing out stats for the hell of it, but one stat that I think is significant and important to share is more police officers each year die by suicide compared to being killed in the line of duty. And the line I like to say, to be straight to the point, is officers are killing themselves more than the bad guys. And it's awful, but it's also working with great people, and they're like these guidelines that Sally was mentioning. It helps guide us, and we don't have to do it alone, and we're not the first ones doing it. And there's great people out there wanting to help us, and it's important work being done.
Thank you. And Mark, how did Union Pacific get involved?
So when you look at the demographics over the past decade or so, it shifts from time to time, but one of the most vulnerable groups is men age 25 to 54. And 93% of our population in the railroad industry, specifically at Union Pacific, is males. And so, they're the population that's most at risk. They're also the population that we employ the most. And we noticed about 10 years ago or so that suicide was an issue of our health and safety protocols, that we became abundantly aware, unfortunately, that we were losing about one employee a month to suicide. And so given the trend of that, we thought it was very important to get active in this area and began to partner with organizations around the country, but also make sure that we had all the internal structures we needed to respond. So, and we also have we have a mantra in the company, which is called the Courage to Care, and which is our motto on all things health and safety. Another way to say is, if you see something, say something. And what better way to implement that motto than suicide prevention, looking out for your fellow coworkers.
Yeah, and your industry is not only a high-risk industry by who's employed there, but also your industry is a means, which I think is also a complicating factor, because there's exposure to suicide death that is very traumatic.
Yeah, I thank you for reminding me of that, Sally. It may come as a surprise to some people who are listening in that we have about 2.5 to 3 suicides per week by civilians on our rail who step in front of our trains. So it's something that we are very, so we also want to be good community stewards and be out there doing all the things we can to partner with local agencies, social services, law enforcement, state agencies, so on and so forth, to be really active in this area.
Yeah. And Lori, your community absolutely devastated by the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic. Fortunately, you had started your work in suicide prevention prior to that. And so would love to know, again, you're thinking about why you had the foresight for that.
Well, unfortunately, suicide was becoming more and more prevalent in the entertainment industry. For both men and women, it rates among the top 5 occupations. And most of these were not the high-profile suicides of the well-known performers. Most of these were the people whose job it is to remain unseen and unheard and to solve everyone else's problems. And it's an industry where you're under constant deadlines. And I need to stress that by constant deadlines, we mean the curtain goes up at 8 o'clock every night. So it's always intense pressure to get the show on. It's also a population where a normal workday is often 14 to 18 hours for multiple days, weeks, even months in a row. And they have complete job insecurity because it's a gig to gig kind of profession. They never know when their next job will be coming from. Shows are getting much larger, more complex, which means they're riskier. Mistakes can easily cost lives, whether it's from a crew member, a performer, or audience members. We've seen some of those recently. So people were talking about it more and more, and the time just felt right. It was being discussed more and more openly, and it felt like we were sort of approaching a crisis point in the industry. And again, as you said, Sally, this was before the pandemic took hold, and that has been absolutely devastating to the industry because our industry was the first to shut down, and it's going to be among the very, very last to start back up. And these are people, as I said, they live paycheck to paycheck. Many of them have no health insurance. They have no security net at all. So it's been completely devastating for this population.
Yeah. And then Steve, representing construction industry, I always love to say, construction, has some of the highest rates for suicide, but they are also a very pragmatic people. So rather than, I have to do a lot of courting and dancing with some other industry groups because they're slow to warm up to it. When we approached construction, they're like, okay, we got a problem. We got to fix the problem. And off you went. And now today, really the construction industry is a model for how industries are getting this right. Talk a little bit more about what motivated you and your company and kind of what you're seeing the larger industry doing. Why are people leaning in?
Sure. We did react to that CDC report in 2016 that gave us the rate around 45.3 to 53. But that report only represented about 17 states. So we looked at the amount of people in construction. It's about 11.2 million. So if that rate is applied to every 100,000 workers, then we're up around 5,000. And like Jeff said, we realized that, depending on what year it is, the OSHA fatality rate in construction is about 1,000. So we're losing more people to suicide than we are to all the stuff on the job. And those are people in our construction community, not on the job. So we decided to address it. And, after having some interaction and exposure to people that were in crisis on the job site, I reached out to see if there was any support or training or any resources I had to help train and help people learn about some stuff. With the statistics being what they were for the construction industry, it was no coincidence that the topic hit home for a lot of people in our community. And we actually had a pilot program that was launched in the Pacific Northwest. So I became a champion for that program locally. It basically encouraged us to raise awareness, be active listeners, and to start the conversation if we encourage someone that showed signs of being in a crisis. This wasn't asking anyone to be a counselor. It was just asking us to have resources readily available for people if they need them. I thought this program was outstanding, and it spoke to me personally. I began to roll out the program in our local office, got a great response. The more we had these conversations in our office and on the job site, the more people asked for resources. So I realized that the response I was getting locally in my office and on the job, I considered it was a snapshot of what may be happening with other companies in the industry. So I shared a version of the program, and I called it the We Are Here For You program. I presented it to other contractors and organizations, and honestly, we did get that feedback. The more I presented it, the more people wanted to learn about it, the more people reached out for resources. So again, it got a great response. And then in August, I became a question, persuade, refer trainer, a QPR trainer. And I've been training internally, and I've been training other organizations with this evidence-based training. The QPR Institute actually allowed me to share some construction-specific slides, which addresses some of the unique risk factors that construction workers have. And it's used in their program as well to help bring the construction industry into the conversation. It helps identify the signs, promote resources, and more importantly, it helps us ask the question.
Excellent. Thank you. You bring up a very good example of one of the midstream practices, which is about bringing some training into the workplace and doing it often and at different levels. I'm going to order the next set of questions really around thinking about upstream, midstream, and downstream. So upstream is about putting practices in place that are more preventative and protective in nature. And so some of those include, engaging leadership to drive this and drive culture, drive a caring culture. Some of it's around decreasing workplace toxicity. So it's not just getting a bunch of quote unquote troubled people, the counselors. We also have to see how the workplace and psychosocial hazards in the workplace are contributing. And then it also has to do with communication. So not just one-on-one communication like Steve was describing, but also a communication strategy for the company. And I think Union Pacific has done a really great job on a number of those fronts. I'd love for you, Mark, to talk a little bit about your CEO engagement, because I think that's made a huge difference, as well as your communication campaign, which I thought was incredibly innovative, the one that you do on World Suicide Prevention Day, and what other practices that you've taken in your approach.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. So I think we can all appreciate that the best way to implement initiatives like this is to have both a bottom down and a top up strategy. And we've been fortunate to pull that together. Our chief executive officer and chairman of the board is highly supportive of everything we do. I can call him and talk about different problems, different things we might be able to do in this space. Every time he does a public appearance, he'll reference our efforts in this area so much. And so he also then is able to influence his direct reports and their direct reports and so on and so forth to really get involved in this and support that. So one thing we started 7 years ago now is on World Suicide Prevention Day, we essentially do, you've heard the military term, a stand down. It's not quite a complete stand down in that way, but it has certain elements of that in which our peer support volunteers fan out across the country, and we have about 500 to 700 of them in 3 different crafts: our transportation employees, our engineering employees, and our mechanical employees. And so they fan out across our system, and they'll meet their fellow employees as they come on and off work. Really, throughout that entire week, we have a couple of days that we really have targeted, but it takes kind of a week to get that done. And they'll meet employees as they come on and off work and hand out literature and share their personal stories and get other people's personal stories about suicide prevention. So it really calls it into awareness and lets the company know that this is a day that we're going to pay attention to and in some ways commemorate. And what's always amazing with that is the personal stories you get from that and the appreciation from our employees. Even if it hasn't directly affected them, somebody always knows somebody who's been impacted. And then, of course, unfortunately, many of our employees have been impacted. And so I think our employees look forward to that every year. And since that time, we've realized we need to be more active rather than just one day a year or 1 week a year. And so we have really put together a 12-month communication strategy. So rather than just thinking off the cuff of, all right, October is Depression Screening Month, the EAP team put together a 12-month calendar with themes and a whole communication plan around the whole spectrum of mental health. So there's a message that goes out to the entire corporation every month, and it's very intentional. And it targets the entire corporation in a very specific way based upon the way you do work and the way you get your information. And it allows us to kind of keep that theme of caring for others and the importance of mental health and suicide prevention right in front of everyone.
Excellent. And I really like how you made the point that a 1 day awareness day or a 1 week even may get people's attention in the moment, but it's really not going to change culture, that we really have to figure out a way to bake it in and give it slow drips over time. So it just becomes part of the fabric of health and safety. Thank you for that. And let's go to you, Lori, because you have also maybe a little bit more of a midstream approach on with your screening and the peer support work you're doing. Talk to us a little bit about how you're helping people identify the crisis a little earlier in the process before it becomes catastrophic, and anything else you're doing in your approach.
Well, what we did to get started was we formed a steering committee that was a mix of industry professionals and mental health professionals. So we had representatives from union labor, non-union labor, large employers, small employers, social workers who work primarily in our industry, as well as some therapists in private practice, but who specialize in the entertainment industry, and industry professionals who had a particular interest and focus on mental health. And we also brought in Vibrant Emotional Health and Sally to help us get started. But the first thing we decided to do, even despite the representation we had on the steering committee, was to do a industry-wide survey, because we really wanted to hear from people about what they were facing every day. We thought we knew, but we wanted to confirm that and see if there were other things we weren't aware of. And we had a really good response to that from across all aspects of the industry. So live events, film and television, broadcast, et cetera. And we had, where we got the most information, we threw in one open-ended question that said, is there anything else you want to tell us? And we had a tremendous number of responses to that. And we, as I was sort of laying them out for the steering committee so that they could digest them, I realized that there were real themes developing. And that's what's guided a lot of our work in terms of what we've launched. For example, we heard from people that they were really frustrated by seeing therapists who didn't understand anything at all about the nature of the work they did. And were making completely unrealistic suggestions and that type of thing. So we were able to launch an entertainment industry therapist finder. So when someone goes to do a search there, they know that everyone that shows up is going to have a basic knowledge of what it's like to work in the industry. So the client doesn't have to spend their first few sessions, educating the therapist. We have these online self-assessments that people can go on and, if they're feeling things, especially during the pandemic, they haven't felt before and they want to just get a sense of it. And what we've discovered is just by taking those, it's giving people a vocabulary to be able to talk with others about how they feel and articulate that. We've got a peer-to-peer chat app, an anonymous peer-to-peer chat app. We've done a lot of work in the area of bullying and harassment because we discovered that was still a big problem in the industry. So we've been launching a lot of different things towards that and a number of other pieces. So it's putting out and a lot of these we frankly put out as quickly as we could because the pandemic set in and we knew our population was being devastated. But we're also working on training for leadership and that kind of thing. So we are trying to hit it at all levels, upstream, midstream, and downstream.
Excellent. And the point that you made that I want to underscore was the fact that where these things are moving now, we are going to need more industry specific resources. It's not good enough to just have a general EAP anymore. Increasingly, we're finding, especially in first responder communities and construction communities, the traditionally trained mental health professional is not resonating with these very high risk populations. And so sometimes we got one shot at doing a warm handoff. We need to know that resource is ready and prepared from the suicide prevention side of things, but also culturally resonant with the people that we're trying to serve. And so. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's a really key thing. I think every industry has its own culture, its own lingo, ours very much so. And you're absolutely right. They want to hear it from their own and they want to hear it in their own language. So we haven't reinvented everything, but what we've done is looked at everything that's out there and then fashioned it in our industry speak, if you will. So it would speak directly to the people working and being presented by people that they work alongside of. And that's made a big difference.
Yeah, or in the case of Jeff, his folks don't want to be trying to comfort the therapist because they're talking, because they either want to be voyeuristic into the trauma or, like I know I'm here, I want to talk about my divorce, not my trauma. So anyway, it really helps to have specialized mental health supports. Jeff, you were, as you mentioned, kind of in the epicenter of that cluster that happened. Was that 2 summers ago, right? Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about the postvention, the downstream part of the work, and then also whatever else you've brought into your approach.
Yeah, thanks. And one of the things I realized too is we don't know what we don't know. And even that terminology in policing, and I don't think it's limited to policing, people didn't know what the hell the term even postvention was. And they think there was, you put 100% into prevention, it's awful when it happens, but then we get back to prevention. And was part, and it's not just me, I'm not saying I did all this, it's great teams that I work with. It's that idea of just making people first aware of what postvention is. And two key things that we worked on and was as part of postvention is the psychological autopsy. And then working with AAS to develop one specifically for law enforcement and utilizing that. And I always say, first and foremost, why is that key to postvention? Our fallen brother or sister deserves that, to find out as much as we can what happened to them. We did that is something that that individual deserves that died by suicide. But then also when you collect enough data the right way, with unfortunately multiple suicides, it starts to themes emerge. And then figuring out that's then informs right back up to the top, the actual prevention aspects of it. And one of the other things we learned, and it's really picking up steam, unfortunately, because of the increase of suicides. One of the things, and as you mentioned, Sally, and as the other Lori mentioned it too, how important the culture of the organization is. And trying to share not just what I'm doing, and not what law enforcement, but hopefully for the audience here in person and the ones that are listening to them. It's the idea of, it's not just the message, it's also the messenger. It's so critical. And I hope people saw it, and if you can, Sally, remind people how they can get those resources and the guides, because one of them that I really want to stress is it's a big piece of the puzzle. It's not the only piece, but how important peer support is. I can't speak enough about the value of peer support, because cops are cynical. And guess what? I don't think it's just cops. It's having peer support members to help deliver that message, to help break down those barriers. And just the one example I'll give you, and I'll turn it back to you, is normalizing. It's okay to have feelings. You're a police officer, yes, you're awesome at what you do. You're big, strong, and tough, but you're also a human being. You can have feelings. And helping normalize that to help officers when they're starting to fall into a crisis, it's critical to peer support.
Yeah, I definitely see that is going to be an ever expanding wave of the future of workplace suicide prevention. I think people are learning more about it, getting more organized about it, and then also getting the lawyers to calm down. Every time I go into a workplace, I'm like, how about peer support? And the lawyer's like, oh no, we couldn't do that. I'm like, yes, you can do it. The police, military, the construction, everybody's doing it. Get on board. Right. And then Steve, one of the things that really inspires me about the construction industry is, they were early adopters really in this, and they got organized. And when you look at social movements, like construction is so far ahead of the curve when it comes to workplace suicide prevention. The Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention is really organizing unions and different contractors and different professional associations, kind of share lessons learned and best practices. And it's really inspiring. So what are some of the approaches that you're noticing and that you've taken in addition to the training that you mentioned?
I think it's important that when you're trying to deliver a message, it's not just the message or a fad. It's a cultural shift and becomes a value. And when you do that, you don't want to start off too fast. My approach, it was really echoed. It echoed what I was asking our people in our industry to do, and that was reach out for help. Beyond going through my own personal struggles and experience the stress and strain that does stem from our work. I was able to empathize with people, but I was no expert, and addressing this topic was new to me. So I am a safety manager. I do a great deal of training, but the topic of suicide and mental health was not something that is widely, or was wide, and I say was widely discussed. After the first QPR training, I was more comfortable with having these conversations. I reached out to one of the local trainers, and I asked if she could present a summary of QPR training with me so that I could present our Need to Talk program and refer people to the QPR training. I also attended conferences about suicide prevention and awareness, so I reached out and networked. One of the conferences that the Construction Financial Management Association hosted in my area was where I actually met a bunch of different people from different organizations that were also passionate about suicide prevention. We had lunch and actually formed the Oregon Construction Industry Suicide Prevention Task Force, which is now called the Partners. This is a partnership managed by Lines for Life, so we got them involved, and they really took it and ran with it. We started having meetings, drafted a strategic plan, and now we're getting ready to provide the resources to organizations that want to launch a suicide prevention culture within their company. Through networking, I continue to deliver training, draft safety meeting topics, present at a variety of venues while continuing to be a champion for our internal program. To summarize and answer the question, my approach was to create, share, and just deliver relentlessly to anyone that asked for help. I've written a couple of articles, I've recorded a couple of podcasts, and I even recorded a video with the American Heart Association, which is on their Hard Hats with Heart website under mental well-being resources. And honestly, none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the other people and their support. So I'm very grateful to our industry and other people in our team.
Excellent. Yeah, I do see it's an issue that actually can bring people together that would usually be on divisions with each other, because we can all kind of unite behind this. And one thing that both you and Lori talked about that, again, I just want to shout out, is that you took time to kind of listen and enroll a whole bunch of people in this effort. It wasn't just a one-person mission. And then you created a plan, a strategic plan. And that, I think, was really also helpful in this year that we've had of complete chaos, is that you had something, you might have had to tweak it tremendously, but you had a plan to help you get through it. So speaking of, all of your industries were impacted by the pandemic, but when I think about the early months of it, I think, all eyes were on New York City as being a place where it hit hard early. And so I want to hear from Jeff a little bit about how that showed up for the essential workers in our law enforcement, and any other barriers that you've encountered during the pandemic or before that have kind of gotten in the way, or things that you didn't expect.
It forced, I think, everybody to pivot and adapt. But before doing that, I like how you were saying with Steve, that idea. You got to have a plan too, right? Have a plan, that's plan A, and then be able to have plan B and plan C without just disregarding plan A, if that makes any sense at all. I keep saying plan. So it's that idea of, we had to stop our peer training for a few months. But then we're just talking about peer again, though, it's that constant training that we do. It's not just a one-off, but we realize, yeah, this stinks, it's awful, but we still make sure we did our refresher training. We did it through Zoom. And much like how there's some people here in person, there's some people online, we were able to do more with the Zoom trainings than we could have done in the in-person trainings. And like, for example, the breakout rooms and testing people and having to do skills practice that we couldn't do if we did typically 100 to 200 person in-person training. But then also just realizing yet again the humanizing aspect of the police force out there, going out because we still have to go to work every day, and reminding the officers that yet again it's scary, and it can create a lot of thoughts and going out to like roll calls constantly. But it's also, there's no one quick way to get a message, and people take messages differently. So we also did videos, we did emails. Honestly, when we brainstormed, we just thought of everything, and it was not which one do we do, it was just a yes. And the last I'll say to you is, and I know the other setting where you talk about upstream, downstream, left stream, right stream, it's the leadership. It's so critical, and having the support. And when I say agencies, I mean everybody, your corporation or your organization. It's leadership is critical, but then it's also the frontline leaders, like in our case, sergeants, and making sure that they're checking with the officers, because you can have the chief or commissioner saying it every day, but they're not the ones out there with the workforce. So finding out there's the difference between leaders and supervisors, and reaching all them. And yeah, I'd like to say we didn't really skip a beat, but the beat definitely had to change and be modified. And that's part of the fun of this. Nobody said it was going to be easy.
No. So again, really great point that leadership needs to be on board, because they set the tone, they drive a lot of the culture. They also allocate resources, both money and human resources, to an effort when they believe in it. And then they can really do a great job of modeling. This is how we talk about this. This is me taking care of myself. All of that stuff's really important. And you're absolutely right. It's the mid-level managers that is where the rubber meets the road. And so they also need to be empowered, I think, with that advanced level training that helps them navigate what happens when things show up as a performance issue or a safety issue. And we've got to address the safety or performance thing in addition to whatever the crisis is that's happening. And so having them really confident in those roles can be really helpful. Mark, you've been at this a really long time. What were some of the bumps in the road that you encountered? And you're also an essential service. And so how has the pandemic shown up and impacted this work of workplace suicide prevention for Union Pacific?
Yeah, so similar to what Jeff said, we, a couple of things have happened in that, you have the culture of the organization, but you also have operations, and operations are always shifting. And what's the theme of operations is to, be more efficient all the time. And so, cut costs, do all those kind of things. And so the rail industry, particularly at Union Pacific, is going through this phase in the last 4 or 5 years of, only focusing on essential work. And so that means some of the trainings that, we think are essential, they think is just kind of nice to have, right? So you're always kind of battling the operations team, even despite the support from up above. And so you have to convince them of like, look, this is worth your time for your managers to be involved in this. And then COVID comes on, and we already had some gaps in our peer support network, people retiring, moving on, those kind of things. And we knew we needed to get more people trained, but we didn't have the luxury of doing in-person training, which is, the kind of the gold standard in a way to really share and connect with people. So the EAP team pivoted on a dime, created new content, and developed a way to do a regular cycle and cadence if we need a new peer support team in Fort Worth or El Paso or wherever it was. So it's forced us to be more creative and think about, all right, how can we get this out there more often and still get the manager's approval to dedicate people to this? I'll say one other thing that's maybe not quite related to that, but it kind of fits with the messaging part and how important the messaging is. We found that, over the last decade that 8 of the 10 employees who died by suicide had never had contact with EAP. And I can only think of a couple of cases that we've had in which someone who was actively involved in EAP, either through a medical leave or having some other, in their services. And we're an internal EAP that uses an external network for its care. So my EAP managers are case managers. So we're highly embedded in the organization and really act as organizational consultants. But 8 out of 10 had never had contact with EAP. And so that's kind of a frightening statistic, knowing that you have to catch a wide path and let people know that services out there, like Steven's talking about and Jeff and Lori are talking about, right? Because when people are in crisis, they need to know there's somewhere to go. And we kind of felt like we were failing our employees in that regard.
Yeah, that, and you're not alone. There's a lot of companies that have an EAP benefit and nobody knows what it covers and nobody knows how to access it. And then they do, and it's 3 calls out and you got to call, you have an internal EAP. So it's different than, but I think sometimes it's the biggest, best secret that companies have is
Right.
the fact that they have this, universally accessible free resource, not just for the worker, but for their whole family. Lori, so let's go back to your pandemic story. Did you experience any barriers in setting the thing up before you started, and then what happened after?
Sure. And before I get into that, I just wanted to mention one of the other things we've done because it ties into what a lot of people have said. We wanted people at every level to be talking about mental health and respectful workplaces and taking care of each other, but we knew it was very difficult for people who aren't trained mental health professionals to talk about. So what we've done, toolbox talks, stand-up talks, safety briefings, whatever you call them in your industry are common. So we wanted people to begin to introduce language about mental health into those, but we knew if we just said do that, it would never happen. So we've actually created sample language for people to introduce into their toolbox talks. And it's on the website and they can go in. We've identified important points and then we've written 3 or 4 different ways of saying each point. So people can find the language that they're comfortable with and incorporate it into their talks. We've even done some pre-scripted like 90-second talks. And we're hoping that will help. And because those talks will happen at every level, it may be a departmental briefing, a site-wide briefing, whatever it may be, there'll be all different levels. And we're hoping that helps, especially helps the middle managers, the middle supervisors, the crew chiefs, the stewards, that kind of thing. I think the biggest barrier for our industry is that a couple of things. One is there's very much this sort of macho cowboy culture, if you will, in terms of people working very, very long hours under difficult conditions. And it's that sort of attitude of, well, I worked 20 hours yesterday, why can't you? Or I worked while I was sick, why can't you? And because it's a gig economy, people are afraid to ask for time off to go see a medical doctor, let alone a therapist, because they're afraid they'll either lose the job they're on or they won't get hired for the next job. So there's a tremendous stigma in the industry. And we really have to break that down. The other huge barrier we're facing is just the working conditions. There's no work-life balance in the industry. People are working extraordinarily long hours. If they're on the road, they're away for long periods of time. But if they're home, they're always getting home after the family's gone to sleep, and they're leaving before the family gets up in the morning, but they still have responsibilities associated with that. So the stress on them is just enormous. And it's a combination of all of that, the culture, until there's some change in the working conditions, and that's unlikely because that's of course all money driven, an extra day to load into the theater or to move when you're on tour, shortening hours on the film set, it's all money driven. So we are looking for ways that we can help people given those kinds of working conditions. And so part of that is that whole idea of everyone caring for each other at every level and checking in with each other at every level to make sure people are okay and to make sure people know that if they don't feel safe, they need to speak out so they don't endanger themselves or their coworkers.
Excellent. And so if you're just joining us on Facebook Live or in the room, we have 4 different industries here talking about implementing parts of the national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. We've got the entertainment industry, which also overlaps a little bit with the construction industry, railroad and transportation industry, and our first responder communities, and really hearing how things went and what lessons have been learned here. I want to highlight one of the things you talked about, because before I started working with construction, I had no idea what a toolbox talk was. Now I do, and it's an example of something that emerged out of construction that is being shared with other industries. So in construction internationally, they have a ritual before every day, before the folks go out into the field and start working, they have a safety moment. They call it a toolbox talk or a tailgate talk or whatever, a safety moment. And for 5-6 minutes, they share something. And historically, it's been about safety. Like, here's how you work this piece of machinery, or, make sure you got your gloves on, or here, let's do some stretch and flex so you don't throw it out your back. Well, they started to bake in messages around suicide prevention into this ritual. And just like Lori shared with us, they develop scripts because people don't know what to say, or they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. And we're like, no, here you go. You just say this, and here's a different way to say it. And here's another resource to highlight. And so all of a sudden, again, slow drip over time, they have all these talking points that then they can start to own. So Steve, what are some of the bumps in the road that you've encountered?
All in all, when it comes to launching the program and getting started, I didn't really have that many obstacles. I have the support of my employer, who understands that the issue, and a lot of other organizations understand the issue, especially in construction. This is one of great concern. Suicide prevention and mental well-being transcends all boundaries, and it's a human issue. So there are many people that understand that managing stress and mental health is very important. However, one of the biggest challenges in our industry is the stigma, and like Lori mentioned, it is that tougher than tough culture that exists in our industry. That was definitely one of the biggest hurdles. But like I said, through partnerships of local organizations, reaching the field crews and the office staff, they started hearing a consistent message. And that message was simple. There is hope. There are resources. You're not alone. And most of all, to be tough, you need to be able to ask for help. Other general contractors, owners, labor organizations, educational institutions, even state and local government started to encourage addressing suicide prevention in their safety topics. The stigma is starting to fade away, I'm happy to say. And for example, it was really surreal for me. I was at my son's baseball practice last week, and I was sitting in my truck, my son's on the field, and there are two people talking. And I heard a carpenter apprentice telling her friend that she went through a suicide prevention training yesterday through her local apprenticeship program. And I was in my truck and I was reading my QPR instructor's manual, and I could hardly contain myself when I heard that. I was like, I didn't mean to, eavesdrop, but did you just say you went through QPR training? It was really good to hear that. This was a direct result of the group that we formed and their efforts to introduce suicide prevention training programs into their organizations. So to me, that was a huge success. Regarding the COVID pandemic, that really put mental health at the forefront of our conversations. Isolation, fear of job loss, fear of just getting sick. They were all things that we needed to address as a group. For the first thing we addressed, and which was embedded in our COVID protocols, was the mental health resources, discussing EAP resources, crisis line numbers, health organization resources. It was all in the forefront. This is really when I started to, being last May, this was when I started to present the We Are Here For You program virtually and through other organizations. And like Jeff was saying, the virtual meeting, it allowed me to present this material beyond anything that I could have done if I were to just follow the traditional model. Lastly, and there's no ways to measure this, but having the conversations now about suicide prevention and mental health, they are less awkward. People identify, people understand, and it's starting. And it seems to me that more people are accepting of these discussions and the meeting topics than the prior year. It's definitely a more organic, natural conversation to have than it was a couple of years ago.
Thank you. Excellent, comprehensive answer. So one of the bumps I've hit since the beginning, still continues today, is that sometimes, when we're trying to get HR folks or employment lawyers enrolled, they get scared. They're scared of increasing liability and exposure and risk exposure. Oh my gosh, if we train peer supporters, then they're going to have, this duty, and then what if they mess it up, and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, not having them on board is problematic because they have power and will often shut down some efforts. So we're actually in the process right now of writing a white paper with some HR professionals and employment lawyers to say, everybody take a breath. We don't have everything sorted out yet, but we have some things that can be really helpful for you as you navigate this space as part of the overall team that's working on workplace suicide prevention. And again, announcement, this is several members here are part of our workplace committee for AAS, and we invite any of you to consider joining us. This is the kind of stuff we're working on and troubleshooting with and sharing practices on, and we'd love to have more representation from different industries. I love storytelling. I do think it helps us bring to life the things that we've been talking about, and I'm hoping each of you have maybe a brief story you can tell of how your work has made a difference, and then also if you've done any outcome evaluation of your impact, that would be also really helpful for our participants and listeners to hear about. Does anybody have a story? I'm going to call on you. All right,
Okay.
Jeff. Go. Okay, Mark, go.
No, I'm thinking, so pass it to Jeff.
What did you say? Pass it to me? Yeah, you know what? I'll tell you a super quick story. And it's when given the line of work that I do, and a lot of times people say, "Oh, do you have any police stories?" And I'd say, well, first of all, I'm not a storyteller because usually it's a bad situation, especially working in suicide. Sometimes it results in somebody's death. And I'm very careful when I do tell stories, but one of the things when I was thinking about when we were talking about this, it's not just all about people that are acutely suicidal, it's trying to get people before that. And with our peer support too, the example I was thinking was I'm a peer member as well. Somebody coming to me, they were in crisis, they weren't suicidal. And I reminded myself what my role is, what it's not. And it's that in between. And just what I was saying, I get it from Crisis Text Line. They don't own a copyright to the line, so I get to use it, I think, for right? Getting people from a hot moment to a cooler calm.
That's a good,
And it just
good line.
reminds me and to everybody here or listening, that's our job in these situations when it doesn't require immediate intervention. And the line I use all the time, and because I was taught this, and I didn't come up with it, this person was going through really hard times. And I said to the person, I go, well, look, you're going through a lot. You deserve to feel good also, especially with everything bad that you're going through. And then what I said to him as we were finally finished, I said, hey, do me one favor, can you? And because he was a smart cop, he goes, well, it depends what you're going to ask me. I said, fair enough. And I said to the guy, do me a favor tonight. Get yourself something good to eat for dinner because you deserve it. With everything you're going through, you deserve to have a time out and just eat something well. And he kind of looked at me and then realized how do I try to get people to do this stuff. I said, oh, do me a favor, send me a text message after you have it because I'd love to know what you ate. 9:26 p.m. that evening while I was sitting on my couch, I got that text message. The guy said, best chicken parm I ever had in my life. And that's why I'd say, that's what we do. No more, no less in these situations. And that story, there's no statistic significance to it, but it means a hell of a lot to me. And that's why I like sharing.
And two really important things you did there. Not only did you encourage the officer to take care of himself, but you also followed up. And that's one of the things we do have a lot of evidence for is that when you follow up, I'm going to check in with you later, or will you call me Tuesday morning? It's that piece in that future thing that says somebody's still going to care about me over there in that time. So excellent. All right, Mark, you got a story for us?
Yeah, so one story I often tell is from that I think kind of represents the challenge that all of us have. Is one of my favorite books is Hemingway's Farewell to Arms. And a sub-theme of his Farewell to Arms is the theme of one man caught up in an uncaring bureaucracy. And because if you remember the story, if you've read it, is this guy wanted to go to the Veterans Administration and just get his arms, right? But the bureaucracy didn't allow that, so he languished. And so what's been really gratifying is, and at the same time challenging, is when you think of, and we started out, when I started here 18 years ago, we had 52,000 employees. Today we have 31,000 employees, but still it can be an extremely anonymous place where you can feel one man caught up in an uncaring bureaucracy. And I think by the joining of our peer support programs and our EAP programs together and really making this a comprehensive strategy, training our peer support volunteers, adopting the workplace standards for work, for suicide prevention and postvention, what we've been able to do is be seeing the caring face of Union Pacific. Because, I think we all know operations can be tough, right? I mean, it can just be a bear for everyone, but people see that team as kind of the caring face. And I don't have one particular story, but we often get, almost on a weekly basis, somebody calling up and talking to one of my EAP managers or somewhere in our system and said, this intervention saved my life. Do we have exact outcome data on that? I can't say that we do. We have some clinical outcome data that show improvement pre-post clinical depression going down 25%. We see of some outcomes that show attendance goes back up after using a medical leave for EAP. So those are pretty good numbers. Global, they're not specifically generated towards the suicides you prevented. But in the last 24 months, we've seen our suicide rate go from about 1 per month to about 1 every 90 days. Now, the 2020 data will show you suicides are down 6% this year, I believe. And so, we may just be reflecting a national trend in some ways, but it's very gratifying when the entire organization knows that they can trust your group.
Great, thank you. And Steve?
Sure. The thing that I talk about is I think one of the greatest successes of since I started to really get involved in this topic is my own personal journey. And last June, as a matter of fact, actually last May, my dad, who is retired National Guard, he worked as a parole officer for the state of New York, right up the street from Yankee Stadium for over 30 years. And he had retired. He moved to Florida. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. And we talked on the phone, but I hadn't seen him in 10 years and it was bothering me. And one day, you know, I had a conversation. I got a call from my sister and says, look, here's what happened. And the long and the short of it is my dad flew into Portland in a wheelchair, and Jace basically showed up at my front door, and he was dying of cancer. He had liver cancer, which we found out that was turning into pancreatic cancer. And I had 6 weeks with him after 10 years. And during the pandemic, I couldn't really have too much interaction with him. But I was his advocate. I fought for him. I did all the stuff with him. I can tell you, I got him situated. The first night I saw him, he flew in around 9 o'clock. The next morning, I was calling my EAP and I was saying, I need help. I need to talk to a lawyer. I need to talk to healthcare professionals. I need to be the best advocate I can for my dad. So I actually gave a toolbox talk on EAPs to about 200 people. And I said, okay, everybody who understands what an EAP is and then or, you know, can define it, what's the acronym stand for? And they said, emergency action plan. I said, that's a good one, but I'm talking about your benefits. I'm talking about what you have at your fingertips that is confidential. Nobody has to know that you're calling, that it offers a wide variety of services besides just mental health and talk therapy resources. And I use that as well to the day. I'm still using that. And I try to lead by example and put my own story out there. And like you're saying with the peer support, if you're putting your own story out there, you're showing vulnerability that helps everybody identify and gives them and encourages them to take that step so they can get help, so they don't have to suffer in silence and think that nobody cares.
Thank you. And Lori, what do you have a story for us? And then we'll open it up for questions.
I think it's more of a general story, and it's some things that everyone on this panel has alluded to. I've done maybe 60 webinars, meetings, podcasts, et cetera, over the last year, primarily to union locals across the country. And it's been an incredible journey because we always get into conversations afterwards. And what I'm finding is people in each local who really stand up and say, I just want people to know I'm here for my brothers and sisters. If you need help, if you need to reach out to someone, you know, come to me. And we're seeing that happen more and more across the country. So I always do an extended section on suicide prevention, and it really resonates with people. So we've seen, and they're very grateful that their industry has come together to create these kinds of tools and resources. And someone mentioned a culture change. And normally a culture change in an industry takes, what, 15, 20 years at least. But the one thing I think we're seeing is the pandemic will compress that time frame considerably, because almost everyone has been touched in some way from a mental health standpoint over the last year. And I think they recognize it. And therefore, I think people are going to be more open to talking about mental health issues, more open to accepting help and to giving help. And so I think we're going to see a speed up in the culture change. And that's the one sort of positive thing that may come out of all of this. But it's really just the caring that I've seen come out in the last year that I think is sort of the big story, the big news, people's willingness to talk about and to say openly that they care about each other.
That's interesting. I do agree that the pandemic has accelerated culture change because we had to. We have a couple minutes for questions. Anybody have a question?
I don't have a question, but I want to let Jeff know I really appreciate you bringing up when we're talking about postvention, the psychological autopsy, and how you guys utilize what you're learning, digging that layer under. And the reason why I appreciate it is because this past year, and I love talking about it because I'm passionate about it. I work for the Air Force. I run a violence prevention program and stuff, so it covers suicide prevention. And we get a lot of ideations. Mm-hmm. So what we did is we took it to that next level, and we're able to ask folks when they came back from getting their help, so we could really hone in and figure out what is going on in our base, is what got you to that point. And we were able to collect, and it really showed a way clearer picture of this is where we need to work here. Because we know each industry is different, but it allows you to really hone in and know this is what we have to do to make this work here at our installation. So I appreciate you bringing it up because I think it's a forgotten.
Yeah, we make
people
assumptions,
always forget about
right?
utilizing, you gotta go that one layer deeper. to get
Yeah.
that picture. So
Absolutely.
thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. We can make assumptions about what's driving hardship, but actually you do so much more, not only having your interventions tailored, but actually people feeling validated and listening to, and that they're important when you start out at going that deeper layer and asking those questions. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to do a lightning round robin with the panelists here about one piece of advice they'd like to give a professional association, a union, a workplace leader before we go. I just want to make the point that the workplace is probably the most cross-cutting system that we have in a public health approach to suicide prevention. Not everybody is in education, not everybody goes visits healthcare, not everybody's involved in their faith community, but pretty much everybody's working, or they were just working, or they have a first-degree family member who's working. So we need to do a lot more. Next year, this room's going to be completely filled, not in a socially distanced way, because this is the wave of the future for suicide prevention. All right, let's start with you, Steve. What's your one piece of advice?
I would say take the team approach, get as many people, and make sure that that team is diverse. And also consider that some people are not going to be forthcoming with their emotions or that they're in crisis. So you have to deliver your message and your educational resources to someone like they are asking for help, even if they're not, because you want to really canvas and give them all the opportunity they can to reach out. Even if no one's looking, they might call that number or take a picture of a sign.
That's right. I always say, assume it's on the menu. You'll behave very differently. Lori, piece of advice.
I would echo what Steve just said. Get as many stakeholders involved as you possibly can. And, try to make sure all voices are heard and take the time to find out what's really going on in your population. Don't just go on assumptions, really reach out to them, whether it's surveys, focus groups, individual conversations, hear what they have to say.
Great. Mark, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, so I think from a messaging standpoint, find a message that's sticky for your corporation. As you know, corporations change themes. It can be kind of flavors of the month. Different things come up all the time in terms of, we're doing this, we're doing that. But I think wherever you sit in the organization for suicide prevention, come up with something that fits your culture and it's sticky, that kind of is evergreen, that people always know it's there. For us, it's the courage to care mantra. And that is the baseline and the foundation then of egress into every conversation we have, whether it's physical safety or emotional safety. So find something that's sticky for your organization.
I love that, the courage to care. And Jeff, what's your last piece of advice?
It is make sure whatever you're doing is evidence-based. Be a thief in a good way, meaning you don't have to come up with it on your own. There's other people doing great work. But then the third part of that is when you take it in a good way, make sure you modify and adapt it to your organization's culture. And importantly, the last thing, there's subcultures within the organization, because what's good for the police officer, in my case, isn't necessarily the same way it's got to be shared with chiefs or captains. And look after yourself, because the best way to promote this is also to start with yourself first.
Excellent. Can I get a round of applause for the panelists? Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for doing the time to prepare and present today. Thank you for our attendees who are here and online. We're grateful that you're here. And my last piece of advice is go take the pledge, www.workplacesuicideprevention.com. Become a pledge partner and get access to a lot more of the information and tools and tutorials that you'll need to do what these folks have done here today. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.